To weigh or not to weigh? That is the question when it comes to bread baking. Hey everyone, welcome back to Grains and Grit. My name is Felicia, and on this channel we talk all things real whole grains from a biblical perspective. One of the biggest questions I receive is why I do not weigh my ingredients when baking bread. And I actually have requests from people to put the weight for ingredients as opposed to, the cup measurements and things like that in my recipes. And in this video, I'm going to be talking to you about why I actually do not weigh my ingredients when it comes to my recipes, to bread baking, all of those things. But I'm also going to tell you when I do weigh. So there are three main reasons why I don't weigh my ingredients whenever I'm baking, and why I'm also not really providing them for people as well. The first reason is, if you've watched my channel long enough, you kind of know this is my philosophy, where people have been baking bread for thousands of years, and it's only been in modern history that we even have things like measuring cups, precision scales that get you down to the grams, and things like that. For thousands of years, women especially have been baking, just knowing what to put in it. It wasn't until I believe the late 1800s, or just in the 1800s, that standard measurements, like your teaspoon, your tablespoon, things like that, started to get more standardized. So for all the time before then, women and men and people were knocking out some excellent bread and meals without any sort of measurements, and they didn't even have our precision temperature controlled ovens. I mean, think of how many thousands of years people were cooking over a fire or in clay ovens. Imagine baking your bread today with no thermometer to tell you how hot your ovens are. So the point is you can bake good, delicious bread that's going to feed your family without all the fuss with all the measurements. Don't get me wrong though, I am very grateful for modern ovens and for measuring cups and things like that, because it definitely makes it easier to learn how to bake bread. Which leads me to number two reason why I don't really weigh anything, is because frankly, I'm a busy mom. I'm a mom of a lot of children. We homeschool. I have this YouTube channel. We got a lot going on. And so my philosophy, especially when it comes to cooking and getting food on the table for all of these people who do nothing but eat in my household, is I try to keep things, frankly, as simple as possible while still giving them good meals. And for me, that means where I'm just measuring things out with typical measuring cups, not taking the time to weigh each ingredient, which I know probably technically doesn't take that much more time, but it definitely feels like it does. And the thing is with cooking, with baking, you are going to learn what the dough should look like, things like that. Pretty quickly, where, you don't have to weigh it. The measurements of it or just observing the dough is going to be enough. Which leads me to number three reason why I do not weigh my ingredients, why I measure instead. And that is because we are usually using freshly milled wheat. And unlike all-purpose flour from the store, see, those people can measure, because an all-purpose flour that you buy in Florida will be the same, if it's the same brand especially, that you buy in Washington or Kansas or Canada. That's the thing with standardized store-bought flour, is that flour is going to be the same no matter where you go. Contrast to freshly milled wheat, it is not going to be the same. It all depends. The amount of flour that you may need for a recipe may vary each day for you. It can be even different than me. I live in a hot, humid climate here in Florida. We are like 80 feet above sea level. So for those of you who may live in a cooler climate, you are high altitude, you might be cold and wet climate. You may be very dry climate. Your measurements, the amount that you need, it might be different than mine. So I can give you, the weights, but it just may not work out for you. And I even say that whenever I measure it. So whenever I say, you might need 9 to 9.5 cups of flour, because again, It depends. That's the beauty with using freshly milled grains. It also varies on the type of wheat that you use. Hard white will probably measure different than hard red versus soft white. You know, it's all going to measure differently, and you may choose to use a different type of grain than I'm using in a recipe. So that's why I just stick to just the actual measurements and observing and learning what your dough should be looking like and how it feels. And this is just going to come with more experience. So don't stress about weighing the ingredients, sticking with your measuring cups, things like that. It's going to be just fine. Now, I will say for those of you who are on the metric system wanting it converted from the standardized, I do not provide the metric system in my recipes. That is something that you can Google. I have seen places where you can just put in the entire recipe and convert it over to the metric system, and boom, there you go. So that's definitely something that I would recommend. I just don't really offer that at the moment. All right, so let's talk about when I do weigh, and more specifically, what I weigh on a scale if I need to. I do not weigh ingredients. If I'm weighing something, it is the dough itself. There are two reasons why I might weigh my dough. I do not do this every time. The two reasons is, one, for those of you who've seen my video about baking bread in the Pullman pan, I do weigh for the Pullman pan to make sure that I'm getting the right amount of dough for that particular pan, because I have found that, that is important. But again, I'm not weighing on the ingredients, I'm weighing the actual dough. And the second reason that I might weigh dough is, if I'm selling my bread, where I need my bread to be like, okay, if I say this is a 1 pound loaf, I need to make sure I'm making a 1 pound loaf or a 2 pound loaf. So if I'm selling a bread, I tend to weigh it to make sure they all tend to look more uniform. And then I also might weigh things more like my rolls or my tortilla balls to make sure they all come out the same size. And I predominantly do this whenever I'm maybe having company come over, or I'm taking it to a special event and I want it to look all nice and uniform and pretty, and they all look pretty much the same size. That might be the time where I, take the time to roll each ball of dough out for those items. But generally speaking, if I'm doing it for my household, I am not taking the time to weigh it. My family doesn't care if some rolls are bigger than others, and I generally eyeball it, and it's all good. So the bottom line when it comes to weighing ingredients or weighing your dough is, my philosophy is just keep it simple and don't stress out about it. If being absolutely precise and everything being the same exact thing every single time, if that's stressing you out, then stop. And especially if it's keeping you from baking good bread from freshly milled grains, then definitely stop stressing out about it and just bake that bread. Get in the kitchen. Enjoy your time in the kitchen, enjoy whatever comes out, and most likely it's gonna be good. And even more likely, your family is not really gonna care if you bake 3 loaves and they're not all exactly the same size or anything like that. What is most important is that you're baking with love and that it tastes good. So hopefully this was helpful for y'all and answering the biggest question of why I don't provide weights, the weight for individual ingredients. And again, the main reason is because with freshly milled wheat, you're just going to have to learn how it is, and it's just going to be different from day by day. As always, I hope this was helpful for y'all, and y'all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next week. Bye.